Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and today I'm coming to you with a video to hopefully shed some light on a question that has been asked a lot in the gun community lately, and that is the Sig Sauer P320 a safe pistol? Now, ever since the introduction of this particular model and its adoption by the US military, there have been people that have been its detractors and people that have been its supporters. It's a very divisive gun, and I understand why. I neither love nor hate this gun. I do own a few. In fact, I built this custom one from parts that I bought from Sig. Now, there have been many stories in the media from various law enforcement agents that have said these guns have just gone off without their fingers on the trigger. They've been holstered, and now we even have a video that has surfaced of a police officer apparently in a jail helping somebody be taken in, and the gun just goes off in the holster. And it is very suspicious and probably gives those people who do not like this gun and claim that it is unsafe the evidence they need to prove their case. However, there's a lot of people that say this gun is safe, and of course the most important safety when it comes to any firearm is the safety that is between your ears. If you do not pull the trigger, if you do not do known unsafe things with a firearm, it will never go off. And with that said, all three firearms that I have here on the table tonight, an HK VP9 Tactical, a Glock 19, and a custom Sig P320 without the manual safety, and as far as I can tell, this is going to be the closest gun that I personally own to the types of Sig P320's that we're talking about, that all of them could be loaded, and if I did not touch them and just left them here on my workbench for 100 years, I am confident that not a single one of these will just go off. After all, every one of these negligent discharges or unintentional discharges that we see talked about, a person was somehow involved in manipulating the firearm, whether it was being carried in a purse, somebody was retrieving it from a holster, somebody was doing something with it and it was on their body. That's when this gun had its negligent discharge. So I still believe, regardless of any of the models, if I loaded a round in the chamber of all three of these guns and came back in 100 years, they would still be loaded and ready to go. Guns are very complex machines. Some have more safeties than others, and depending on the designs and the actions, some people can argue that they are more safe than others. However, every gun requires a lot of steps internally for it to successfully fire a cartridge. And so each one of these guns has some things in similar, and they are a little bit different. In fact, some of the complaints people have about this gun are also found in other models that we don't find these problems with. I want to start off by first talking about the Glock. Now, when these came into the country in the 1980s, a lot of people hated them. They still have many detractors to this day. They didn't like the fact they were made of polymer. It does not have a manual safety, and everyone said these guns are just going to go off. However, this gun has three safeties. We have a trigger safety. There's a little thing in here that some people call a dingus. Let me see if I can activate it here. As you can see, my finger has to depress that in order for the trigger to be pulled. If I don't, the trigger cannot be pulled. So that is the first safety. The next safety that's in the firearm is the striker is at half cock. So even if it fell off of the sear, it would not have enough energy to enter the chamber and ignite the primer. The third safety that we have is a firing pin safety. So if I take this gun apart, you will notice that there is a little button right there. And if this button is not depressed, even if the striker, if it was fully cocked and came off the sear, could not enter the chamber, this would block that firing pin from doing so. So those are the three safeties that are found in a Glock pistol. So in order for this gun to go off, the trigger must be pulled. By pulling that trigger, you activate or deactivate this safety right here. By pulling the trigger, it pulls the striker back to full cock and it depresses the firing pin safety. All three of those have to activate at the same time for the gun to go off and to fire a cartridge. And a lot of people over time have come to accept that as being a very safe design. But now let's talk about the HK-VP9. Now this is a very popular pistol here in the United States right now. In fact, they have a couple of different models of these. People carry them all the time, and nobody has ever complained about these guns having negligent discharges. Now this gun shares many of the safeties that we find on the Glock. So let me go ahead and drop the magazine. Of course, safety check the firearm. You will notice that this gun does have the trigger dingus, if you want to call it that. And in order for that trigger to be pulled, it has to be depressed, and we can pull it that way. Let me show you again. If I don't push that dingus and that little safety, the trigger cannot be activated. All right, so now let me take this gun apart. We'll talk about another safety that's in this gun that is similar to the Glock, and that is it has a firing pin safety right here. Now this one is not a button, but it is a lever. As you can see, when you pull the trigger, this lever is moved out of the way, allowing the firing pin to enter the chamber. So if I wanted to push that firing pin in, I can't go any further than that. But if this lever was out of the way, that firing pin could enter the chamber. Now, one of the complaints many people have had about the Sig P320 is that the striker is at full cock at all times. That makes it very unsafe. Well, believe it or not, the VP9's striker is at full cock as well, and I can prove it. So if I put the gun back together, you can actually see the striker in the back right there. That lets you know that the gun is charged. So when I pull the trigger, you'll see that little red dot go away, and that striker is at full cock. So the people that say the problem with the P320 is that the striker is at full cock all the time, well, they're not aware of there are a lot of other striker fired guns that also have that. So does that inherently make the P320 unsafe? I don't think so. Some guns use this system, some guns use the Glock system. Now, I will fully be honest with you and tell you that the Glock system is probably more safe. However, it makes the trigger pull a little bit worse. It's going to be more mushy. That's why guns that have the striker at full cock will have better triggers, because you're not having to pull that striker back. You can make the trigger break a little bit crisper and have a lighter break. But now let's talk about the SIG, the P320. Now the first thing you will notice is that this trigger does not have a trigger dingus. So there's nothing that would prevent you from pulling that trigger. So this is a lot easier to be accidentally pulled, especially if you're carrying it in a holster or in a purse, especially where you might have foreign objects in there that could get in the trigger guard. Now that's not necessarily unsafe, because after all, there are many guns that don't have a trigger safety, like revolvers. But revolvers do have a much harder trigger pull. This is going to have a very light trigger pull. Now let me go ahead and take this gun apart as well. Now when I pull off the slide, I can show you that this gun does also have a firing pin safety, but it works a little bit different. There's a little lever right here. Now, unless this lever is depressed, nothing can enter the chamber. So as you can see, even though this is not fully cocked, if I try to push that firing pin into the chamber, it will not go. That lever has to be pushed down in order for me to push the firing pin into the chamber. So when it comes to the safeties of this gun, the P320 really only has one internal mechanical safety if you don't have the manual safety, and that is going to be the firing pin safety. And I think this is the crucial thing that we need to talk about, because when Sig first introduced this gun on the market, they had some problems, and they admitted there was a problem. And the problem was, they said the trigger itself was very heavy, and when it was dropped at a certain angle, the inertia of this trigger could be pulled back far enough to release the sear. And if that trigger came back, there's a little lever right here which would depress this lever right here, and that would allow the striker to enter the chamber. However, when it comes to the video recently of the police officer, when the gun went off in his holster, it was holstered. There was nothing there to pull the trigger, and the gun was not jostled in any way. Now, Sig did address this feature by lightening these triggers up. They've skeletonized them, and it's my understanding they changed a couple of the springs internally to prevent it from happening. But the idea for them was to lighten the actual trigger, so if it is dropped or hit a certain way, that trigger could not be activated. So the obvious problem with the Sig, in my opinion, when it comes to the trigger, is the lack of the dingus safety here on the trigger face. That is obviously a big deal, and many other striker fired guns utilize some type of safety there, and I think that's very effective. Now, when it comes to the gun being at full cock, like I mentioned, I don't think that makes the gun unsafe. I've already showed you the HK has that same thing, and we never have issues. I think when it comes to what is malfunctioning in these guns, if it is a malfunction, is going to have to be this firing pin safety. Because once again, even if the striker came off the sear, it cannot enter the chamber unless this lever is depressed. And the only way to depress this lever is by this arm, or this lever right here, coming up, because the trigger is being pulled. Now, whether it is intentionally being pulled or accidentally being pulled. So that tells me that if that gun in that police officer's holster truly went off, you had to have this internal safety that honestly is very simple, and I think well built and well designed, because it's very similar to all of the other designs that we see on other striker fired pistols, either broke or malfunctioned, or the trigger had to have been pulled in some way. So maybe the design flaw of the P320 is that the trigger is too easy to pull. I personally believe that the easiest way to fix this is to add one of those trigger safeties to the design. That would give you two safeties just like the HK. But of course, if Sig does that, they would have to admit that this design has a flaw in it. But I personally believe as long as you do not put this pistol in a situation where this trigger can be pulled, the gun still is safe. However, when it comes to all the stories that we hear, and for the purpose of this video, I am going to say and assume that all of the stories are truthful. Like the female police officer that had one of these in her purse, she went to retrieve it and it went off. I still think that maybe something got lodged in the trigger guard and the trigger got accidentally pulled. I definitely don't think she was intending to do it, but it accidentally went off. So for me, when it comes to the design of the Sig P320, I do think it could use another safety, especially one in the trigger. However, in order for these guns to simply go off like we're hearing stories about or seeing in videos, the safety that has to malfunction is this one right here. I know a lot of people right now, as I mentioned, are talking about the full cock of the striker. That is not the problem. We don't have issues with guns like the HK VP9. And I honestly don't think that these are falling off the strikers. We have so many of these guns in civilian hands and in the military, and we don't hear about these issues. It almost always happens with law enforcement. So what really could be the problem? Now, I don't know this for sure. It is my personal opinion that these triggers are being pulled accidentally. So what can cause that? I definitely think having a holster that is poorly designed, or having an improper holster, one that is designed for a very similar gun and you try to make this work, something gets in that trigger guard and allows the gun to be pulled. So let's say, for example, in the video that we recently saw about the police officer, maybe he had this in an improper holster and he had put it in as far as he could. However, there was something in the trigger guard because the holster was not designed for the Sig P320. Then when he went to pick up that other person and do whatever he had to do by bending over, the pistol went in the holster just a little bit further and was able to pull that trigger. But in my opinion, regardless if it is intentional, unintentional, if it's a negligent discharge, or if the gun is safe or unsafe, the one thing that I think every story has is this trigger has to be pulled in order to release this safety right here so the striker can enter the chamber. That is the issue. And the only way for that striker to be pushed is by pulling this trigger. So as I said, if there is a design problem, it has nothing to do with the full striker, it has nothing to do with the lack of a manual safety, it has to do with the trigger and how easy it can be pulled. So I am not making a statement that the gun is flawed, and I'm not making a statement that the gun is safe. They do have a safety on this. It is well designed in my opinion, and I think it definitely works. It does its job. I would be confident that if this striker came off the sear, it would not enter the chamber. It has to be pushed. The other thing that it could be is we have malfunctions in these little arms, but I don't think that's the problem either. I really think that these triggers are too easy to be pulled. I think the best solution for this would be for them to add a trigger safety like you see on the Glock and on the HK. And I think that would definitively prevent this trigger from being pulled and deactivating that safety by that arm coming up and pushing that lever. But without having access to the gun in question in that video and having a forensic firearms analysis done on it, I don't really know what happened, and I can't validate any of these stories. I don't love the P320, and I don't hate the P320. I'm just trying to look at this from an objective standpoint and figure out what is wrong. Is there a design flaw? I can definitely see how some people would say there is, because these other guns have more internal safeties. And I would like to see another safety on this Sig. But the design itself, I don't think is flawed. As I said, as long as this trigger is not pulled, there is no way for that striker to enter the chamber because of that striker firing pin safety. It is literally impossible. I'm confident I could load these guns once again, leave them for 100 years, and they would never go off. But possibly that trigger is too easy to be pulled back, deactivate the safety, and because the striker is at full cock, maybe it could come off that sear too easy. But no matter what, that safety has to be deactivated, and the only way that can happen is with that trigger being pulled. And that is what I think is wrong with the Sig. Well, not really wrong, but what's happening when it comes to these guns. Maybe they could be redesigned, reconfigured to make it harder to pull that trigger. I personally don't think the Sig is necessarily unsafe as it sits. However, it could definitely have more safety features in it. But once again, if Sig admitted that, they might have lawsuits on their hand. But this is just what I'm talking about and trying to think about when it comes to the mechanics of firearms, because they're very fascinating machines and a lot of things have to work in conjunction for them to fire a cartridge, including the P320. So this is just my thoughts, analysis, and opinions on what possibly could be wrong with the Sig P320. What do you guys think? I know there's some people that watch my channel that hate the Sig, and I know there are some that love it and defend it. But what do you guys think? Do you think this analysis is accurate, plausible, or am I completely off base? But regardless of which gun you like, which gun you use, or what safeties are inside, once again, the most important safety is the one between your ears. And I'm going to stand by that forever. So let me know what you think in the comments section below. Sorry I don't have any definitive answers, but I'm just trying to approach this question by looking at the mechanics of the firearm and trying to determine what could be the problem. So, as always, Thanks for watching.